Hey everybody, so I'm going to try and do a video of the Laravel stuff that we did yesterday, and I'm trying to remember exactly what I did, but regardless, if it's not exactly the same, it will get us to the same end goal. So here we go. This file that we're looking at right here is our web.php file. This is our default routes file. So any request that comes in from the outside world to our Laravel application through the server is going to this file, and the type of request will be responded to based on how we've set our routes up. So most responses are GET requests. So if I am open up a browser, and let's open up this browser here. So if I go to google.com/index.php, oh, they stopped doing that. Interesting. So you can't do that anymore. Okay. Google.com. What I'm doing is I'm making a request for the default / there. I'm making a request for whatever the default page is that Google or that Google server has been set to serve up when anyone types in google.com. Now, when I search for something, then it provides a couple of keywords to the server, and Google knows what to do with all of these words here, and all of this stuff means something to Google's server and ultimately to the language. At one time was PHP. I don't know if it still is, but whatever language it is answering this request. It's not serving up an actual file that exists on the server. It's serving up a collection of technologies that make the browser think that it's a file. It spits out an HTML stream, and then the browser just interprets it and displays it however that HTML stream is configured. So there's no file when you're dealing with a framework like Laravel. The same is true for Node. Node is not actually spitting out a file. It's spitting out, if you're using the template engine, it's spitting out a template. And that template is a collection of directives that tell the data to look this particular way or to do this particular thing. And all of the associated CSS and JavaScript files that go with that, all those get linked in. As far as the browser is concerned, it just looks like a regular HTML file. So Laravel, as a framework, answers requests with code, and that code gets converted into something that the browser can look at. So for instance, when I, on my Laravel application, request just the root of the domain, it's going to pull this view file. Actually, it's not a view file. Where is it at? Blade files. So blade file, yes, it is a PHP file, and it does look like HTML, but it has to be interpreted as a PHP file because there are PHP directives in here. Let me go to them. And in fact, they're not actual PHP directives, they're Laravel directives. Laravel's built using PHP, but we can give it these directives, and these things do lots of stuff, which we will get into later on. So this file isn't just spit out to the browser. It actually goes through a lot of stuff that's built into Laravel to make sure excuse me, that any directives or closures that we've included in this file are properly processed, so what the browser gets is just straight up HTML. And that's probably the best way I can describe it there. So it's important to remember that our Laravel application requests just the root of the domain. It's spitting out an HTML stream. And all of the associated CSS and JavaScript files that go with that. And all of the associated CSS and JavaScript files that go with that. So just, it's important to remember that our web.php route file, it's just routing requests to data store, if you will. Not really data store, it's a terrible way of describing it. Data store is a database, which we will be connecting our blade files to data eventually. But for right now, just understand that this is our most basic, this is the default route that comes with the bare Laravel installation. And when you get a request for the domain, it serves up the welcome page. Now, I have created another blade file called home, and so I could, if I wanted to, change this from welcome to home, and oops, not, it's Laravel test. And if we switch it back to the welcome screen, save that file, reload this page, we get our welcome blade. So regardless of what we type into the URL, it's not pulling a file. It's dealing with routes. Like that one's not found. But I can easily create one by typing index here. And now it will pull up the welcome blade. So the routes satisfy and connect requests coming in from a browser or from the internet. In these cases that we're working with so far, they're GET requests. And then it's returning an appropriate collection of code. So, cool. That makes sense. Now, what we did prior to this, hopefully you've been following along with the GitHub repo. You should have something similar to this, where we have, let me just kind of break this up a little bit. This is a route. This whole thing I've selected here is a route. And what it's doing is it's looking for the URI segment posts, and then anything after that, it's storing into this wildcard. So it's basically saying whatever you type after this posts / is going to be stored in this post variable. And then we send that post variable right here into this anonymous function, which is encapsulated between these curly braces right here. Within that anonymous function, and it's an anonymous function because it doesn't have a name, it's just a function anonymously. In that anonymous function, we're setting up an array called posts. So don't get too confused. This is posts, this is post, so this is containing the URI segment that someone may have typed in after the posts URI segment in the URL. But posts, the variable, is an array, and it's an associative array. So it's associating this key with this value, and this key right here with this value. Cool. And then what it's doing is it's returning the view, just like this return view works here, except it has a second component to it. So we could just have something like that, and where it returns the view, and it would work fine, except if we were anticipating some variables coming in, that would throw an error. And we want to send variables along because we want that view to be reactive to whatever we're typing in after this posts /. And so we are sending to the post variable now, and it's not really a variable. In this case, it's an object, and we're sending from the array the value that matches with whatever came in through post. So if someone typed in /my-first-post, that would be stored in the post variable, and as we access the array index, posts, my first post, the value returned will be this right here. If someone had typed my second post, then the value returned would be here, passed along to this post object. Okay, so let's look real quick before we move forward. Let's look at our post blade file, and in the post blade file, here we have this closure, and this directive is saying just echo whatever is inside of the post variable. And that post variable is coming from right here. So we're abstracting this as part of this, storing it into that. Cool. So if I come up here and I type posts/my-first-post, boom, hello, this is my first blog post. And if I change this to my second post, hello, this is my second post, because that is what is stored in this array. So if I change this to yo, save that, reload this, hello, this is my second post, yo. Now what if I tried third post? Well, this isn't going to match anything, and so it's going to return an error. Gross. Okay, so let's go back over here. What we're going to do is we're going to use today something called a controller. For real simple data matching, something like this is perfectly acceptable. If this is all we're ever going to do with it, but we want this to be a lot more powerful, and ultimately we're going to be accessing stuff from a database. So we need to get familiar with the concept of controllers. So Laravel is a MVC framework, which means it's a model view controller. So your models, your views, and your controllers all handle a piece of the process. The models are what connect the data. So they present your database data as objects that you can access, or models. The views are the things that we use to create what's visible or what's viewable in the browser. And then the controller is kind of the traffic cop between those two. And so the controller that we're going to use is going to be called posts controller. And we're going to change this route a little bit. First thing I want to do is I want to comment out all of this stuff. And I'm going to get rid of this thing that's on line 28. Cool. We're going to get rid of the anonymous function. And we're going to say, okay, for every request that comes in that has a URI of posts / and then some other random string, I want to call the posts controller. And specifically inside of the post controller, I want to call the show method. So remember, objects contain methods and properties. Methods are things that are actionable, things that do stuff, and properties are representative of values, of descriptions. So you can look at your properties as like using the body model. So my body, I have 2 eyes. So 2 eyes would be a property of me. And if I only had 1 eye would be a property of me. I have 10 fingers, that's a property. But what I can do with my eyes and my fingers, my eyes I can blink, so that would be a method. It's something that I can do. My hands I can make into fists, or I can do high fives. Those are methods. Those are things that I can do with the hands that I have and with the eyes that I have. So in practical terms, a method is generally a function, and a property is generally a variable. So hopefully that clears things up. So we're saying inside of the post controller, and really this is a class, post controller class. A class is just a class of methods and properties, which becomes an object. We're going to access the show method. Cool? Okay, sweet. Save that. If we try to run our code now, it will totally fail because it's going to say post controller does not exist. Okay, well, let's create that. Give me a sec here. So if you're using Atom like I am, the controllers are located, so twirl down app, HTTP controllers, and here's your controller. And I have the post controller created. I'm going to just delete that. Goodbye. Okay. Do you never want to delete the default controller? That's part of Laravel. We don't want to mess with that. It's kind of a template. So in Atom, if I want all of this controller structure, I have to copy this file into a new file. If you're using some of the other code editors, I won't name them, but sometimes you can get plugins for them that, like Laravel or the editor will recognize that you're using Laravel, and if you right-click in the controllers folder, instead of choosing new file, you can actually choose to create a new controller file, and it will actually create all the default logic and code that you need to make that controller work, which is really cool. But we don't have that. However, we do have something very cool called Artisan. And so I'm going to pop over to my terminal. Let's bump this up so you can see it a little better. Okay. I'm inside my Homestead folder in my host machine. Artisan is something that's a function built into Laravel. You have to run it from within the Laravel folder, and you have to run it where PHP is running. Well, in my host computer, I may or may not have PHP running, but I definitely have PHP running inside of my Vagrant box. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this next code inside of my Vagrant box. So in the Homestead folder, you'll need to vagrant SSH. Cool. And then we'll need to cd into the Laravel folder. Cool. And there we go. Okay, so PHP is built into, and is running inside of this box. Oops, PHP minus v. Okay, so PHP, I don't know if you've ever used Python, but you can run a Python command by typing Python and then the file name that you want to run. We can also do the same thing in PHP. You can actually run PHP files from the command line by typing PHP and then the name of the file. So let's try, let's see what happens. Okay, oh, because we're in Laravel, that's not going to work. Anyway, if we were to bear PHP install, we could do something like that, and it would spit back the HTML of that PHP file. It's kind of interesting, something to look at later on. But for right now, we're going to use something that's built into Laravel called Artisan. And if you type PHP Artisan and then enter, you'll see all of the different things that Artisan can do. It's really extensive, and we actually will be using Artisan a lot because it, just like Laravel leverages PHP to do all kinds of cool stuff, Artisan also leverages PHP to do all kinds of cool stuff for Laravel. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a controller, actually. So if you scroll up here, you can see these are all the things that you can make, and here is controller. It's make:controller. So it doesn't worry about what subfolder you're going to put it in, or you don't have to go in and make changes to update the code that you copied from another controller. It's very simply PHP Artisan and then make controller, and then you give it a name. And what are we calling this? That's right. It is called posts controller. Enter. Controller created successfully. And so now if we look over here, there's our post controller. It put it in the right spot, and it's given us our default stuff. Now it looks a little different than controller.php because this has a lot of use declarations, and we don't need those for this controller just yet. So let's open up post controller. Awesome, and it's already set up the class for us. The class is called posts controller. This is very important that your class name is the same name as your controller name. Super, super important. And it's got 2 forward slashes indicating, hey, there's some stuff that needs to go here. Okay, real quick, just as a caveat, I want to show you something. Let's go back over here to web. I'm going to unhighlight or uncomment these lines out here. Okay, this is totally going to fail. If I come over here to terminal, I'm going to try and make another controller. Let's call it controller 2. It won't do that because it recognizes that your Laravel actually has an error in it. In web.php on line 26, it says, hey, I don't know what this means. This doesn't exist yet. This is kind of a cool way to debug your Laravel application without having to run it out to the browser and viewing stuff and creating views. You can actually see if your code's working without actually getting to the part where you're calling up a blade file. You can see if the code is functional by trying to run it on the back end here through Artisan. So anyway, that's just a little side note. So I'm going to undo removing those comments, put them back in, save that file, and then I'm not going to actually create the file. I'm just going to type PHP Artisan, and yeah, it's working. So with this out like that, and if I type PHP Artisan, it will say, hey, there is a problem with your code. You better fix it. I'm not going to make anything until you do. That's my impression of Laravel. Okay. And everything is good in the world. Okay. So in our post controller, what we want to do is we want to create a function called show, or a method called show, but it is actually a function. So I'm going to get rid of these 2 forward slashes here, and I'm going to type public function show and open and close curly brace. Now, class constructs place the curly braces below the line, as opposed to when you do functions in PHP and JavaScript, which tend to place the curly brace at the end of the first line that's declaring the function. I'm not entirely sure why this is different. I think this is from old school programming, but I see it everywhere in class constructs. Laravel does it this way. So even though our web.php, we have this first curly brace, and then here's the closing curly brace, and it's on the same line. We haven't typed it like that, even though that's acceptable. When you're doing functions and in the routes like this, or just regular functions, I like to keep it this way. But when I am doing classes and I'm constructing a model, I like to do it this way, because that visually tells me this is something different. This is something, I guess, more important, you could say, even though it's not really more important. Okay, so what we want to do is we just want to see if this method is working. So I'm going to do a return here, and I'm going to just return hello and save that. Okay, so remember, over here, we have our route. It gets anything after posts, stores whatever URI, whatever code's in this URI segment to the post variable, and then it calls the post controller method called show. So it loads up post controller and accesses show. And behind the scenes, you don't see this, but it actually is injecting this variable into the method. And we're going to deal with that in 1 second. So let's go back to our browser now, and let's reload this here. And there it is. Hello. So you can see what I'm talking about. We can just change this to something else. Reload. And there it is. And it doesn't matter what we type here. It will always pull that up as long as there's something there. Now, if I type it without a URI segment, what's going to happen? Not found, because we're not giving it any kind of segment there. What if I added a space? Would that work? Nope. No worky. What about number 2? Yep. Hello. Excellent. Okay. So I'm going to get rid of that because we're not actually going to return that. We're going to do something. We're going to grab this code right here, the stuff we commented out earlier, Command or Control X to cut it, and then I'm going to just get rid of those comment characters. And I'm going to post that code right in here. Cool? Okay. The only thing we're missing here is that when we are calling this function, or this method called show, we're passing this variable post along. Well, right here, this method instantiation isn't set up to receive any variables, so we probably should set a variable up. So let's call that post, just like we did with the anonymous function. Also, side note, public function, we use the public keyword when we want this function to be accessible outside of this class. If we set this to private, then it's only accessible inside of this class, right? Public, private, that was the third one. I may be having that wrong. But anyway, public, for sure I know, allows this function to be accessible outside of the class. If you don't want it accessible outside of the class and you want it privately held, then it will be accessible through only functions that are inside of this class. We can have a bunch of methods stacked up inside of this class that do different things, and you may only want to have a function that does certain stuff that other functions will use inside of this class, but nobody outside of this class should have access to that information. And there are a lot of cases for that. Okay, so we're grabbing posts, we're setting up our array, and we're saying whatever comes through here that matches one of these key values, send that value to posts. Okay, let's give it a shot. My first post. Hello, this is my first blog post. What? It totally works. Hot dang. What do you think about that? Very cool. Very, very cool. Okay. So I think that's where we left off. I think that's about as far as we got. We almost made it to here, but now we totally made it through where we needed to be. So the next video is going to be setting up the database and actually going through how to access that database. Okay? Thank you very much.